Hey listeners, just wanted to take this time to thank everyone for your support. It's been 2 months, and this channel currently has 213 subscribers at the time of this recording. Thank you so much. Y'all are the real MVPs. And if you haven't done so already, and if you like my content, please support me by subscribing, liking, and commenting on my videos. It doesn't cost anything and will go a long way to helping this channel out. Thanks everyone, and now back to the stories. Stargaze. Hey, my name's David. Me and those in my circle are avid outdoors people. That includes most of my family and friends. It's the same with my girlfriend, Nina. Camping is our favorite activity. Doesn't matter what form of camping. We've done it all from primitive camping, staying at cabins, or an RV. We just love being out in nature. Most times, Nina and I will go by ourselves. Sometimes with my family and friends or hers, or both. Heck, there were a few times we'd go in a huge group and form ourselves a tent city. We try to go at least once a month. We've done some winter camping and ice fishing here since we're from Minnesota. This story happened a few years ago when Nina and I visited our families in California. We went to Big Bear Lake during one weekend. It was the summer, so it was hot and sunny. There were 6 of us, 2 of my cousins, Nina's cousin, one of her friends, and us. We spent the day hiking, swimming, fishing, and kayaking. Afterwards, we had ourselves a barbecue. We just hung out and had a few drinks after dinner. I actually didn't drink, but most of us did. Nina's friend Mai was still up with Nina and I past midnight. Everyone else had already gone to sleep. We were stargazing when this glowing neon green oval object cruised by and started hovering over us. Upon seeing it, I sat up to do a double take. "Are y'all seeing this?" I exclaimed without even looking at the others. There was no response, but I could tell their eyes were glued to the object in the sky. It drifted behind the tops of the pine trees, then darted away, disappearing into the night. The whole thing probably lasted no more than 20 seconds. After it was gone, we looked at each other in shock. "Y'all saw that, right? I know y'all saw it," I asked. "Yeah, I've never seen anything like that. You think it was a UFO?" Nina asked. "Aliens don't exist," Ma responded. She has always been a skeptic about everything, which includes everything supernatural and paranormal. Me, I'm pretty much on the opposite end of the spectrum. I consider myself to be pretty open-minded to a certain point. So, to counter her response, I asked, "Mai, what do you think that was then?" "Probably a plane or some sort, maybe even a military aircraft." Then I said, "I can maybe understand it being a military aircraft, but there was no way that was a plane. It was suspended in midair for several seconds. Plus, planes have lights that blink and stuff, but they never wholly surround planes like that. The whole object was completely engulfed in glowing neon light. It was like a glow stick, except it was oval-shaped." I went back and forth with Mai about the mysterious object, possibly being associated with aliens. Then Nina said, "Well, whatever it was, we couldn't capture it on camera to show the others, so it doesn't matter." That was at least something Mai and I could agree on. Unless someone intentionally had their cameras out, at the time there was no way to record or document things like that. I could see why recorded sightings of aliens and Bigfoot are hard to come by. Anyway, we told the others about it the next day during breakfast, and even they were split on what they thought we saw. After breakfast, we went home. But what do you guys think? Have y'all ever seen a UFO or a sighting you thought was associated with aliens? Midnight fishing trip. It had been a while since Kenny or any of his friends went camping, and that weekend the weather was supposed to be perfect. The timing couldn't have been better to catch up on some fishing. Their plan was to head out before sunrise the next day, since it was a 2-hour drive to their favorite fishing spot. It was Friday, and they were off work for the next 2 days. The opportunity was so tempting they couldn't wait until the next day, so they decided to leave after 9 p.m. when Kenny's friend Mike got off of work. Their favorite fishing spot was at a river inside a state park. The 6 of them went in Kenny and Mike's trucks. As planned, they headed out immediately after Mike got off of work, only stopping to buy fishing licenses and a few last-minute items at the local Walmart. It was almost midnight when they got to the campsite. It was pitch black. They couldn't even make out the shapes of trees a few feet in front of them without a flashlight. There were no other sources of light besides their trucks and flashlights. The campsite was on a hill just off the main road that wrapped around the park. The hill overlooked a river from where they were, but with no lights, it was hard to tell it was even there. There was a small parking lot where they parked their vehicles. It was approximately 30 yards from their site. The fishing spot was at a spillway on the river further up the road. It was a 10 to 15 minute walk from the campsite. To get there, they had to walk up the road, then down the side of the hill. Their favorite fishing spot was at the bottom of that hill. After setting up camp, they split into 2 groups. Mike and 2 others went ahead to do some fishing, while Kenny's group stayed behind. Kenny's group hung out by the fire for about 10 minutes before checking in with the guys at the river. "Catch anything yet?" Kenny asked as he walked up the river bank with a flashlight in hand. "Yeah, a couple," answered Mike, with both hands still on his fishing pole. "Not bad, considering you guys just got here." Kenny hovered over the stringer, shining his light on it. "Stripers, decent ones too." "Hey, they don't call me the fish whisperer for nothing. I can do this in my sleep," Mike boasted. They hung out for about 10 minutes. Kenny undid the fish from the stringer and brought them back to camp, while Mike's group remained at the river. Kenny's group seated themselves around the fire. Just 5 minutes after their arrival, Kenny heard footsteps coming from the main road behind the trees. So he looked over to see what it was. The other 2 noticed Kenny looking around and paused to see what was happening. The footsteps got closer and faster. They almost sounded as if it were someone running. They discussed it among themselves and thought maybe it was Mike's group playing a prank. They even laughed about it as the footsteps continued over the pavement, continuing to pick up more speed. Then they went crunching over the grass and leaves. Closer and closer they came, then off the grass and back on the pavement in a full-on sprint. All of a sudden, there came a loud boom. It seemed like something or someone slammed into the side of one of their trucks. "Oh shit!" Kenny exclaimed. Everyone jumped up, their attention focused toward the parking lot now. All of them stood there in shock and silence, until one of the guys shined his light over to the area. There was nothing obstructing their view of the vehicles like bushes or trees between the parking lot and the campsite, but they did not see anything emerge from the road. Being a licensed concealed gun owner, Kenny grabbed his pistol from the holster and a flashlight. He rushed toward the trucks, followed by the other 2. They investigated the area and each of the vehicles, but saw nothing. There wasn't even a scratch on them, nor did they see anyone or anything leaving the scene. No debris or anything. It was as if some invisible force ran into their trucks, but there were no dents or scratches anywhere on them. It didn't make any sense. Mike's group was told of the incident when they got back to camp about 10 minutes later, but they didn't believe it and laughed it off. The ones who witnessed it knew better though. They didn't experience anything suspicious after that, so they hung out and fished until noon the next day. This was truly a strange and bizarre experience Kenny and his friends will never forget. The deer. 2 finally came upon a deer trail after hours of hiking through the forest. He smiled and wiped the sweat beading on his forehead. It was a cloudy, cool autumn day, but the terrain was unforgiving, especially carrying his .270 caliber Winchester rifle and a 35-pound backpack full of gear. 2 put the strap of his rifle over his shoulder and knelt down to study the tracks. They looked fresh, maybe less than a day old. He then hid and waited in some brush, parallel to the trail about 50 paces away. The spot Two chose had a tree he could lean his back on if rest was needed, or hide behind it if necessary. About an hour passed by without any sign of a deer. Then, from out of nowhere, came what sounded like a motor of a car struggling to start. It appeared to be coming in the direction the deer tracks came from. Two waited a moment to see if the noise would cease. It stopped and started at random intervals. At that rate, the noise would scare all the animals away. Annoyed and a little curious, Two followed the mysterious sound for about 15 minutes when he spotted a small hut next to a stream about 25 paces from his current position. The hut looked inviting and well maintained from the outside. The strange noise stopped once he got to the door. He knocked a couple of times, and an old, plump man came to the door. The old man had a shiny bald head with snow-white hair around the sides. He also had a full beard, the same snow-white color as his hair. It was long, but was neatly straightened and brushed. He had light brown eyes, and on the bridge of his nose sat a pair of elegantly designed, golden-framed pair of glasses. The old man sported a white robe with red and gold trimmings. The fabric on the robe had a sheen to it. Two could see a vague reflection of himself on it. The old man reminded Two of Santa Claus, though not as pale in complexion. The old man's attire was quite peculiar, as fancy as it was. It looked like something to be worn for a ceremony or festival of some sort. "Hi, I was out hunting and thought I heard the sound of someone trying to start their car, but it seemed like they were having issues with it, so I came by to see if they needed help," Two said. "Car?" The old man looked puzzled. He took a moment to think about it, then said, "There's no car around here." "I see. My mistake. I'll be leaving now," Two said, and he left. The rest of the day was uneventful, and he returned to camp for the night. On Two's way back to the deer trail he saw the day before, Two spotted a white deer grazing from a distance. It was a huge buck, probably the biggest he's ever seen, with a rack as long as his arms. Two couldn't tell exactly how many points it had on its antlers, but there had to be at least 10. He crouched into the tall grass and quietly unslung his rifle from his shoulder to arm himself. He rested the butt of the gun against his shoulder with his non-firing hand around the forestock as his eye focused on the target between the crosshairs. Two thought the deer to be an albino until he looked at it through the scope. The buck was more handsome than he originally thought. Its coat was an off-white cream color. Even with the obstructions, the shot was as perfect as it was ever going to get. Two calmed his nerves and slowed his breathing like he had done hundreds of times before. He inhaled with the crosshairs over the buck's heart, then exhaled as the barrel of his rifle exploded. At the last second, the deer moved. The shot didn't get its heart, but was true nonetheless. It jerked from impact and took off instantly in the opposite direction. Two took his time pursuing his prey cautiously. He followed the trail of blood, zigzagging around trees and brush for a good 30 minutes, but the deer was nowhere to be found. He started to wonder if perhaps his shot had not been as good as he initially thought. The blood trail led him back to the hut he saw the day before. However, some things appeared to have changed overnight. The well-maintained hut from the day before was gone, and in its place was an old, dilapidated shell of its former self. One of the walls had already collapsed. The stream next to it had been transformed into a bone-dry bed of rocks. The trail turned bloodier and more sporadic the closer it got to the hut. Two picked up his pace, following it to the entryway. From there, he could see puddles of blood leading to an old, worn-out, and moldy mattress on the floor in the back of the hut. Two's heart stopped upon seeing a man sprawled atop the mattress, with half his body soaked in the red of his own blood. Two ran over to check the man. He knelt down and lifted the man's head up, and saw that it was the old man from the day before. His face was covered in sweat. He was still warm. The old man's eyes and mouth were still open, with blood streaking from it. Two tried shaking him desperately, trying to wake him up, but there was no response. He put his head on the old man's chest in an attempt to listen to a heartbeat, but there was none. Seeing as there wasn't much he could do, Two shut the old man's eyes. As much as he did not want to, he'd have to go to the police. Just as Two was about to get up, the old man's eyes flew open, and his limbs twitched. Surprised by the old man's reaction, Two froze, and the old man seized him at once. He pinned Two down, trying to take a chunk out of his neck. The old man's eyes were lifeless and gray, his face twisted with rage as he snarled and snapped. Two tried as hard as he could, but he was no match for the undead man's supernatural strength. All he could do was watch helplessly as the snarling corpse inched his bloody maw closer and closer. The last thing he saw was his gun propped against the wall by the entryway. Then he let out a blood-curdling scream as the undead man sank its teeth into his neck. Two sat up in a cold sweat, screaming in terror, until he realized he had awakened from sleep while sitting against a tree out in the middle of the forest. His hand instinctively went to his neck. He felt around, then looked at it. He was relieved there was no blood. Two looked up and saw a huge deer standing over him. It did nothing but glared at him. The deer was the same one from his dream. Something about it dared him to go for his gun, but he made no move. Instead, he just tensed and swallowed hard. They both stared at each other for what seemed like hours. Then the huge buck ambled past him. A sudden breeze blew by as Two stood up. He looked around for the deer, but it had vanished without a trace. Two was convinced the deer had to be a forest spirit or guardian of some sort. Possibly even a god. Though it did not communicate it in the same manner as humans did, he had no doubt the deer was responsible for the visions in his dream. For the first time in his life, Two felt what it was like to be an insignificant being in the presence of something so powerful, like an ant to a human. He was lucky to be alive after encountering the supernatural entity.